Hello, BookTube. I have a Friday morning mail haul for you here, and I'm thinking, as always, when we have this confluence of events, Friday, of course, is when all BookTubers, loyal and true, make their Friday Reads video, where they talk about their reading progress for the week, what they're reading now, and what they plan on reading for the weekend, when I would hope that a lot of you have the weekend off. I know a lot of you don't, though. God, this is the horror stories that I hear from you all about this work that you do, these jobs that you have. Some of you don't get weekends off. Some of you get random days off during the week, and you can't even predict it. I remember that from retail. I used to tell my managers when I worked in retail at a bookstore, they would say, well, you can put your requests forward, but we'll make a schedule for the next 2 weeks, so don't lay claim to any free time until you see that schedule. And I would tell them, what? No. No. For the last 20 years, I have had the weekends off. What kind of a life would that be if I couldn't tell my friends when I'm going to be free? No. I'll tell you the days that I want off. But I saw it happen. I saw that environment changing. I think nowadays, for instance, at the bookstore, I used to work at a Barnes & Noble. And I think the schedule at Barnes & Noble is made by machine now, and not by a human being at all. So there's not even any court of redress. The Schedulatron 2000 tells you when you will and will not be at work. But I've had a very good reading week. I have been reading a little bit. This is Friday. I've been reading a little bit overtime for the last 4 days because I didn't get in much reading at all over the weekend because I was up in Vermont. So I had a wonderful pause in my normal routines there. But I've done a fair amount of reading this week, read a few good books. I've also had a lot of deadline work to catch up on. And I'm having another interruption in my schedule today. I'm having a guest over tonight. So my reading has been good, but this has not been a banner week. But one of the things that I like to do when I get mail in the morning on Friday is wonder whether or not any of the items in the mail are going to go on my TBR for this weekend. Whether or not there's going to be anything immediate here. So let's go through these. There's just a handful of packages and see if anything in here is actually going to go on my list for this weekend. Let's see here. What is this? Okay, it's a work of history. It's got a lot of material. A lot of material that I don't need. All right, this is from Penguin Random House. This comes out in June, so it will not be on my Friday reads because it's too far in the future. This is by Jonathan Kaufman, and it is The Last Kings of Shanghai, the rival Jewish dynasties that helped create modern China. China dominates headlines across the world today. Yes, it does. Not just for its economy either, lately. But its role on the global stage has an epic, complicated history. In this book, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Jonathan Kaufman reveals a hidden portrait of 20th century China, one intrinsically connected to Baghdad and Bombay, London, and World War II. Inspired by an accidental visit to the Cathay Hotel, located on Shanghai's famous waterfront and built by scion of the Sassoon dynasty, Victor Sassoon, Kaufman uncovers two rival Jewish dynasties that flourished in Shanghai and Hong Kong as China surged into the modern era, shedding light on how and why China is the global power it is today. Fascinating. So this author found this story and decided to dig in and see what he could find. So who is he? He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter who has written and reported on China for 30 years for the Boston Globe, where he covered the 1989 massacre in Tiananmen Square, the Wall Street Journal, where he served as China bureau chief from 2002 to 2005, and Bloomberg News. Wow, okay, so he is the director of the School of Journalism at Northeastern University in Boston. So he's about as credentialed as you can get on the subject of China. Fantastic. Boy, oh boy, I wonder if he'd be interested in doing an interview. He's right here in town. And you all were very nice about the one and only author talk that I had on this channel. I face a few logistical obstacles that somebody has to come here, for instance, which means they have to be willing to be assaulted by my little miniature schnauzer. Frida is she so loves meeting new people that her enthusiasm for the first hour or two is indistinguishable from rage. so that you have to do that. First of all, the person has to be a dog person, first of all, and then they have to come here, and then I have to deal with my bumbling attempts at technology. Some of you joke that I am such a boomer, but I'm actually the generation before the boomers, so it's even worse. But I would love to do it because I had a ball. I love doing it, and I have a lot of experience talking with authors. Just a natural, free-flowing conversation with authors. Nothing stilted, nothing dumb, nothing pandering, nothing PR. And you all seem to like it. I have to work on that. I really do. Or I have to find a way around it. If I can't overcome my own technical deficiencies, then I need to find a way around them. Because there are a lot of authors in Boston or coming through Boston I bet you'd like to hear from. Anyway, Last Kings of Shanghai sounds fascinating, and it's done by an author who knows exactly what he's talking about, but it does not make the Friday Reads list. I don't know that any of these will, but it certainly doesn't, because it's too far in the future. I'm still staring guiltily at the mountains of February books, and February is westering towards its close. Okay, this next one is July, so this also doesn't count. Let's see. Let's see what we've got here. This is by J. Kirk, and it is Avoid the Day, a new nonfiction in 2 movements. Avoid the Day. Comes out in July. On assignment to investigate the fate of a missing manuscript by Bela Bartok, acclaimed journalist J. Kirk found himself on a journey that would take him from rural Vermont, oh good God, is there any other kind of Vermont, to Eastern Europe, to the Arctic Circle. He had taken on the task in part to get away from home, where he was confronted with the prospect of his father's failing health and longing for a distraction from their fraught relationship. Well, aren't you the perfect son? Yeah, go to Antarctica when your father is sick. Okay, all right, well, maybe there's circumstances that I don't know about. As he dug deeper into the mystery, he started to see himself in Bartok. Okay, all right. In the composition of the Cantata Profana, which revolves around fathers and sons, and in his research across the village of Transylvania, the same ones that Bartok had visited to find inspiration from local folk music. In this book, the author recounts his search for answers and the unlikely turn of events that brought him to a cruise to the 24-hour sun of the Arctic, filming an impromptu horror movie with his filmmaker friend. While his story is fascinating in itself, Kirk's innovative nonfiction writing does more than report the facts. It pushes the boundaries of realism to search for meaning in his experiences. Okay, nonfiction does that. Like Bartok, who reinvented classical music in the 20th century by incorporating Transylvanian folk music into his work. All right. I wouldn't. Okay. I'm not sure that Bartok reinvented classical music for the 20th century, and if he did, I'm not sure that's why or how he did it, but it's interesting, anyway. Like Bartok, Kirk's quest to create meaning in his life through writing about it redefines what can be accomplished in narrative fiction. Okay, so this is, the pub sheet says that this is part memoir, part detective story, and part gonzo journalism. And this comes out in late July, so this comes out in the middle of summer. Doesn't involve my weekend at all. Sounds kind of interesting. Let's see what this next one is. Oh my. Okay, all right. This comes out in late May, so this once again probably does not make the cut. Maybe there'll be nothing in here that will enter my Friday reads. Maybe that's the case. Oh, the cover has schmutz on it. I wonder if I'm going to be able to get that off without delaying you here. Without delaying year, as Bones McCoy would say. Well, okay, I got some of it off. So this is not my usual cup of thing. Let's see. This comes out in late May. This is How Innovation Works and Why It Flourishes in Freedom. And it's by Matt Ridley, who's a New York Times best-selling author. Who says we need to change the way we think about innovation. It is a collective and collaborative process, never the accomplishment of a lone genius. hear that so often. I hear that so often. But I'm okay with hearing it if it's said by teachers in elementary school to their classes. But being told it by an adult in a pub sheet for an adult book in an adult market. Innovation is an incremental, bottom-up, fortuitous process that results from human exchange, not an orderly, top-down process that occurs according to plan. Okay, but that isn't. That doesn't reflect the straw man of the first sentence. We now have a second straw man to prove his point. Which point? Those are two different points. One is saying that it's a bottom-up process that involves incremental changes. But the first contention was that it's entirely collaborative and never individual. But a bottom-up process that involves incremental changes can still have a gigantic leap that one person makes. In fact, it almost always does. And that is a different... Well, anyway, here. Let's buckle down. To prove his point, I know you're all saying, we are buckled down. You're the one who's losing it. To prove his point, Ridley eschews abstract argument and chronicles real stories of innovation going back millions of years and looking forward into the near future. From steam engines to jet engines to search engines, from telegraph to social media to artificial intelligence. Ridley emphasizes that innovation is crucially different from invention. Yes, it is. Of course it is. But it's not unreal because it's different. It is a real thing, and it is very often done. Innovation, not invention, is very often done by one person. In fact, most of the time that I've heard a writer or a commentator say that it takes a village to invent something, I always want to say to them, yes, okay, fine. Yes, invention is the bottom-up thing that is done in increments and parts, and that is done collaboratively by many, many people. But innovation is taking invention one step further, which is often done by just one person. Well, anyway, I've lost my place here because let's see here. Ridley emphasizes that innovation is crucially different from invention. It is the turning of inventions into applications and of practical and affordable use to people. Sadly, it is also something that few policymakers or business persons fully grasp. Okay, we've gone on to a different tangent. This whole paragraph has had like 3 different books in it. I wonder what the actual book is like. I guess I'll have to read it and find out. Matt Ridley is uniquely placed to tackle this elusive but vital topic. He regularly discusses innovation with leading figures in Silicon Valley, including Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and Peter Thiel, and is keyed into the latest thinking and debates in high tech. And, of course, he has a TED Talk. He has a TED Talk. He's award-winning, best-selling author of several books, including The Rational Optimist, Genome, and The Red Queen. Oh, The Red Queen got a lot of play. His books have sold more than 1 million copies in 30 languages worldwide. He writes regularly for The Times in London and The Wall Street Journal, and is a member of the House of Lords. And he lives in England. And now I want to know, Matt Ridley, I want to know now, if he's a member of the House of Lords, I want to know his antecedents. I want to know his breeding pedigree now more than his book. I'll have to look him up and see what I can find. I notice if he's a member of the House of Lords, he leaves all honorifics completely off. He leaves titles off of his name. He's just plain old Matt Ridley. Hey, Matt. Not your lordship. Hey, Matt. Okay. So he is uniquely placed to tackle the elusive but vital topic, and I hope that turns out to be true. Because in books that I have read like this, with innovation in the title, usually the author is either blurring the distinction between innovation and invention or assuming they're the same thing. And they're not at all. So I guess I'll have to read this and find out. But you already know that, right? He wouldn't be talking to Mark Zuckerberg. Why is he talking to Mark Zuckerberg at all instead of a room full of anonymous technicians who made apps or who built the first generation of Facebook? Why is he doing that? Because innovators come along and take inventions and change them. And very often it's because the innovator, whether it's Tesla or anybody else, sees something that the inventors in their mass anonymity did not see. That often happens. There are whole books on anyway, let's move on. So far we don't have any candidates, not even one, for this weekend. Which doesn't have to be a matter of simple propinquity. It could be, I could get a June book that would be so incredibly compelling that I would move it right to the front of the list anyway. Okay, all right. This next one has 2 books in it. So we're going to have a nice mail haul here. So what is this first one? This first one is Oh, okay. This first one is a paperback release. Oh, I see what's going on here, I think. I hope I do. All right. All right, these are... Bear with me here. We're going to get through this. The first one is I wish more publishers did this, actually. The publisher sent me an advance copy of this author's next book, which comes out in June. But they also, in the same package, sent me an advance copy of a new copy of the paperback release of the author's last book. I very much appreciate that. I wish more authors did that. I wish that more authors had the time, the money, or the sense, especially when it comes to books in series. Every once in a blue moon, I'll get an author who will do that, a publicist who will do that, but most of them don't. So you get the new Charles Finch book, the new Maggie Hope book, and you just get that one thing. You don't get the last two. Or lesser-known series where it can't be expected that you would... But it doesn't matter in this case anyway, because the author has jumped from nonfiction to fiction, which makes the inclusion of this book all the more interesting. So the nonfiction book that we're getting here is a paperback release, came out in late January, of The New Rules of War by Sean McFate. A very nice trade paperback. And Sean McFate, that is our author. And he is a professor of strategy at the National Defense University and Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service. He served as a paratrooper in the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division. Good for him. And as a private contractor. And his book, I don't know if you can make it out here, but it's Admiral James Stavridis, who is he's no small shakes as a writer himself. I have reviewed his books. And he says Sean McFate is the new Sun Tzu. This come out in paperback. It comes out in paperback January 28th, so it's in your bookstores now. Though our military remains undefeated, the United States has lost every war since World War II. That is the opening sentence of the pub sheet. Incredible. But within a generation, our military's fate will undoubtedly change if we continue to cling to the past. Today, more than 80 years after World War II and 30 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the number of armed conflicts being waged around the world has doubled. Unless you listen to Steven Pinker and his ilk. You say that the world is better now than it's ever been. If the United States refuses to accept that we are once again living in dangerous, unpredictable times, it is inevitable that our military, until now undefeated, will fail. Wow. Okay. So, great. He is the expert, not me. I would say that contention is not true, but at least not in the lifetime of our great-grandchildren. The preponderance of force is still a thing, as the kids say. But you never know. He could be right. He's the new Sun Tzu, and I'm not. So that is the paperback release that came in this package. But also, his next fiction, his next novel, which comes out in June. And the New Rules of War has a cover by Jim Stavridis. But the new novel, High Treason, has a cover by Mark Greaney, the author of the Gray Man series. So you've got you went to radically different people for your blurbs. Let's see here. In this pulse-pounding third action thriller. Oh, okay. Right, so there are two others. I don't know if I have them. I'll have to find out. Maybe get another package with 2 books in it. Hero Tom Locke must stop traitors and ruthless mercenaries working together to overthrow the president. Well, it depends on who the president is, doesn't it? The incredibly timely plot, dealing with Russia, their infiltration of U.S. politics, and the shifting of blame, has a real-life angle that will resonate with everyone. High Treason is perfect for fans of Brad Thor, David Baldacci, Vince Flynn, and Matthew Quirk. Unusual among military action thrillers, Sean McFate has an elite military background. Like we heard, he was a paratrooper. And in this book, the U.S. Vice President's motorcade is hit in a vicious, expertly planned attack that throws Washington, D.C. into chaos. The VP is killed, along with hundreds of people. Everyone assumes it's terrorists, but young FBI agent Jennifer Lynn believes the answer isn't that easy. Half a world away, paramilitary contractor Tom Locke has his own doubts about what happened, and also suspects more than the obvious players might be responsible. He thinks his former employer, Apollo Outcomes, a company I hope, might be involved. But why would the global private military corporation orchestrate an attack on U.S. soil? Returning to D.C., he discovers that a civil war has secretly fractured Apollo. A rogue unit has splintered off, led by a power-hungry former colleague. But Apollo couldn't have pulled this off without help from inside the government. The VP's official itinerary and route were confidential, which means there must be a traitor high up in the White House who is leaking information. I'm sensing some of these lines pointing towards the Oval Office. Are you? Locke is framed for the terrorist attack and the vice president's assassination, but who is pulling the strings? Islamic terrorists? Or is this a new ploy by Putin to subvert American leadership? Or is someone else behind the attack? Is perhaps had the vice president been guilty of a mildly critical remark towards the president? All right, well, it sounds like a pro forma political thriller, but the guy has serious nonfiction chops, and he has a blurb by Mark Greaney. Now, I know that doesn't always count for anything. Plenty of blurb writers are contacted. They just blurb the book. They don't read it. I don't know, one way or another. I would like to think that Mark Greaney is not going to recommend a book that is really bad, but you never know. So come June, neither one of these counts, actually. Come June, I will read this. I will, in the meantime, investigate maybe getting the first two Locke thrillers. And New Rules of War is a trade paperback release, and those usually I don't prioritize. I'll get to it this week, but not this weekend. And then the last thing on this mail haul, the last chance we have to add a book to my Friday reads, my actual Friday reads, to my immediate reading docket. This is a finished copy, so that's good. Oh, okay. Okay, I've had this and I've ignored it. This is a March book, I believe, but I think this might do it. This won't take long at all. It'll take an hour to read. What is the date on this thing? Okay, this is the very end of March. So maybe not. It won't take long to read, and it is inherently interesting. Maybe not, though. Maybe we don't have. Maybe it's a clean sweep. But this is a book that will be of interest to a lot of you. I'm sure this author's name will be known to a lot of you. This is Bart Ehrman. And this is his new book, Heaven and Hell, The History of the Afterlife. According to a recent Pew Research poll, 72% of Americans believe in a literal heaven and 58% believe in a literal hell. This is also a worldwide phenomenon. There are over 2 billion Christians who follow Jesus. Well, yes, I would imagine that they do. And most believe that because of their faith, they will have a glorious afterlife. Whether believers or not, nearly everyone wonders about what, if anything, comes after death, and speculation continues to feature in popular culture, like in the recently concluded and critically acclaimed The Good Place. In this book, Bart Ehrman investigates the powerful instinct that gave rise to the common ideas of heaven and hell and that helped them to endure. He comes to surprising and unexpected conclusions. Neither place of the afterlife is taught in the Old Testament or even in the teachings of Jesus himself. From the Epic of Gilgamesh to the writings of Augustine, that should be St. Augustine. If you earn the saint, then it's there, whether you believe in saints or not. I don't think you're a saint, whoever wrote this pub sheet. I think if you were, you'd probably want it there. If your son-in-law insists that doctor be in front of his name when his old school classmates are sending him letters, then we can put saint in front of Augustine. Okay? Ehrman recounts the long history of life after death. In different times, places, and cultures, people held a wide variety of views, and Ehrman is adept at showing how these influenced one another and changed in response to their historical, social, and cultural situations. His driving question is why and how Christians came up with the idea that all souls will experience either eternal bliss or everlasting torment, or even purgatorial pain. Ehrman shows that the historical Jesus, St. Paul, just Paul on this pub sheet, but he's also a saint, and the author of Revelation would have been utterly perplexed by such ideas. These ideas are later Christian developments. Of course, Bart Ehrman can't tell us exactly what happens when we die. Well, no, he can't. I can. As a young Christian, he believed with absolute certainty in literal heaven and hell and feared for his own fate after death. As an adult, Ehrman lost the comfort that came with certainty, but eventually found it again and explains why in the closing of this book. Okay, all right, well, Heaven and Hell concludes that some of the world's greatest thinkers, including Jesus, believe there could be something to look forward to after death, but that there is certainly nothing to fear. Okay, All right. Well, this comes out at the end of March. The new book from Bart Ehrman. Okay. All right. Well, something to look forward to after death, but certainly nothing to fear. Nothing to fear flies in the face of every organized religion. Every organized religion preys on the fact that you might be afraid of what will happen to you forever after you die. In order to control you here in the present, they do that. They tell you, you will not do this, and you will do this, and I, as a spokesman for your organized religion, have the right, the ability, to condemn you to an eternity of punishment if you don't do what I say. I'd like to think that percentage of Americans, 58%, believe in a literal hell. I would like to see that go a lot lower. I mean, what is a literal hell? That you're punished forever? In physical pain? So it's not duration. It's not durance vile, where you're just sitting in a cell. It's that you're being tortured. It's not just that you're in hell. It's that you're being tortured forever. There is no crime anywhere in the catalog of human capability that warrants an eternal punishment. Eternal torment, eternal torture. There's no crime that does. The worst thing you can possibly think of doesn't warrant that. Can't warrant that. Humans don't commit crimes on that level of reality, on that level of longevity. So punishing, torturing someone, the medieval church fathers and church writers and whatnot used to gleefully specify how such torture could happen. That you were submerged chest deep in boiling hot water or in a lake of literal fire that was burning your flesh off, but that thanks to a heavenly disposition, your flesh grew back faster. So you would watch it brighten and then pink and then steam and then char and then rip away, and then it would grow back with you screaming the whole time, never sleeping, never pausing, just constant horrible torture forever. Leaving aside the fact that a supernatural deity that created such a system would have to be more twisted than any human being has ever been. There's also the injustice of it all. As counter to human intuition, as counter to your gut feeling as possible, you step back and think about it for a minute, you will realize that even Stalin doesn't deserve being physically tortured in agony forever. Forever. For millions and millions and billions of years. No one deserves that. No crime deserves that. And there's also the fact that it's not merciful. And the heart of the law is mercy. So what is going on there then? Did the God of the Old Testament, does the Messiah of the New Testament, are they handing humans a rule that they themselves are not obeying? And if so, how does that exempt them from hypocrisy? Not that any of it matters anyway. You are an animal. You are an animal. You are a member of the only species in the world that can say it's not, but you are an animal. You can be reduced by 5 minutes of targeted surgery on your brain. You can be reduced to someone completely different from who you are, or to a child, or less than a child, a baby, someone who can't move or feed themselves. An ordinary person trained at Duke Medical can put you under anesthesia, and in 5 minutes of manipulating your brain can turn you into that and make it so that you can't ever be turned back. It takes 5 minutes to do. So, you're an animal. So you're an animal. We can do that with all other animals. We do gleefully do that with all other animals and have for years, for centuries. And it can be done to you. And there's no soul. There's no perfect mimeograph of you that doesn't undergo that kind of punishment or that kind of change. If you are changed in that way, you are changed in that way. There's no part of you that isn't. You're an animal. You're a physical being. You have a brain that's incredibly complex, and it thrives, it feeds on heavily oxygenated blood that is pumped throughout your whole body by your heart. That blood fills the complex crevices and tissues of your brain and allows them and their neurons to function the way they do. And the way they do is incredible. It's incredibly complex. Think about it for a minute. Why do you wake up the same person you went to sleep? Some of you, most of you, are unconscious for 10 hours straight. And yet you wake up with remembering exactly the things that happened to you right before you went unconscious. You are the same person. Why do you come out of anesthesia the same person? When you're completely unconscious, you're completely gone. All of that is due to your brain's incredible evolution and architecture. It's amazingly complex, but it needs that blood to work. It is not amazingly complex in the same way as the Milan Cathedral. It does not stay complex if you're not constantly keeping it that way. You have to constantly keep it that way. Think of it, instead of thinking it like a cathedral, think of it like a souffle. It is perfect unless you mess up, or unless you wait too long, or unless you neglect it. And if any of those things happen, it's not perfect anymore. It can go into being a mess, unrecognizable, inedible. Same thing is true with your brain, which is all of you. Your brain is you. Okay? Your brain is you. There's no part of you that isn't your brain. Your brain is you. It has all of your memories, all of your personality, all of your experiences, all of your extrapolations into the future, all of your ability to learn and grow and love and hate. All of that is your brain. This thing right in here, in this dome of bone that was evolved to protect it. That's what you are. And the minute your heart stops pumping that blood, your brain starts to die. You know the phrase, brain death, and you know the length of time, minutes. And after the brain has stopped being supplied with that heavily oxygenated blood, the heavily oxygenated blood that it needs in order to be you, in order for you to be you, after it stops being supplied with that, it starts to die and dissolve. It starts to fall apart. So that even if you did pump blood back into it, it wouldn't matter. You wouldn't be there anymore. There would all that stuff, that magnificently complex architecture that you need, that souffle that you need to keep up, would be gone. And there wouldn't be any way to get it back. But we don't pump blood into dead bodies. Instead, we just let them go. And the brain is the first thing to go. And it's gone. Just gone. And when it's gone, you're gone. Not anywhere, because you were never anything but that. That's what you are. You are that brain. And it's incredible. It's magnificent. And it allows you to experience this incredible world and everybody in it, and form all of your relationships and decide what's important and what's not. And if that's not enough for you, one way or another, when we say that something is true, it's because we can show it to be true. We can point to something and say that is true because. I'm saying this is true because. When you tell me that anything that I just said is not true, when you tell me, no, I'm more than just a brain, I'm also an intangible, exact mimeograph of myself that isn't reliant on my body, that isn't reliant on gravity or space-time, that isn't reliant on time itself, and that is going to go to an alternate dimension when I die and be me forever. Well, okay, you can't show me any of that. That you're just believing that, and that's fine. You can go right ahead and believe that if it gives you comfort, but you can't say it's real. You can say it's your belief, but you can't say it's a fact, because it's not. I can show you what will you can tell me I have a terrible distaste for bitter foods. I can't stand them. And I personally know a man in his late 50s who I got through medical school with his essays, who could in 5 minutes change that fact about you. You would wake up from anesthesia, from his incursion in your brain, and you would love bitter foods. He can change that about you. So there is no permanent mimeograph of you that exists separate from you. And I can prove that he can do that, because he can do it to you. And we have plenty of proof in history that has been done to many, many people, either by surgery or by accident. You can't prove any of the stuff that counters that. You can say all you want. That what was it? What did this pub sheet say? Something to look forward to after death, but certainly nothing to fear? Well, you can say there's something to look forward to after death, but you can't prove it in any way. You can't indicate, you can't point to it in any way whatsoever. The closest that religious people in any denomination can come to pointing at anything like that is so-called near-death experiences. And once again, we know exactly what a near-death experience is, and we know exactly the cascade of brain chemicals that causes you to have one. A sufficiently prepared neurosurgeon in an operating room can cause you to have a near-death experience in the peak of health in 5 minutes under anesthesia. So we already know what that is. You can't point at that and say, well, there you go. If I can reproduce it without any fear of death and without any religious denomination, you can medically induce a near-death experience in a child who's too young to know religion. Anyway, So this will be interesting. It'll be a little bit disappointing at the end because Bart Ehrman he did grow up as a fervently religious person in a religious background, and then the more he studied the history of religions and the more he studied science and reality, the more he fell away from it and realized that it might serve a vital cultural function, but it isn't real. The most you can do is say that you believe it. You can't point to anything and prove it. You can't say you're justified in believing it. You can just say you believe it. Like if you believed in elves, you can say that you did that, and if it brings you comfort, more power to you. I'm happy to do that. I would rather that you not legislate so that I have to say I believe in elves when I'm 5 years old in school. But just as a belief, I have no objection to it. And Bart Ehrman got to that point, and it sounds like he got away from that point as well. Maybe because he woke up with a heart arrhythmia one morning. That tends to break people's resolve, and that ought to tell you something right there. I'll be interested in reading the final chapter. I have a feeling that personal return to some idea of faith will probably be the only thing that critics talk about when they write about this book. I will try to give it a little more attention than that. Goodness gracious, though. Okay, so late March. Still not an addition to the list unless I add it. I could add it because I don't imagine there's going to be much to this, though. I know the history, the liturgical history of the various religions, various afterlives that humans have come up with. I know the history, and I know the reasons why. I know the central reason why. There are two reasons. One, the reason why you come up with an afterlife is because you're afraid of dying. And the reason you come up with the concept of hell is because most people in the world, in the history of the world, have not had power. Most people have not. And they're in full view of people who do. And they know that they're not going to get justice in this world. Most people know that. And they automatically leap to an idea of justice in some other world. A justice that you can't escape is how Christians often put it. There's a judge you can't escape who will judge you one day. And they do that because they have an aggrieved feeling of the injustice of the world. And that is true. That feeling is true. The world is unjust. But that ought to make a wish fulfillment scenario in which the guilty are punished not only for certain but forever all the more suspect. It's so obviously wish fulfillment that ought to make you suspect it. I'd much rather believe something like the Norse idea of the afterlife, where we just fight forever. But even that, even Valhalla, is suspicious. Because if it reflects your temporal culture, if you can look at it and say, well, okay, but what about X that's a part of your world, but you don't value it, but now times have changed and we do, well, then that means your afterlife was an invention of your world and is certainly not true. Same thing. I love the idea of Valhalla, that we go into the afterlife and fight all day long and then heal immediately and drink and bond and tell stories with our friends all night long and then fight the next day. That's a wonderful idea of the afterlife, but what's it missing? Women. It's missing women. Because the era, the culture that spawned it didn't care about women to the extent that they cared about men. The men wrote the stories. If it reflects your culture like that, it's probably an artifact of your culture. And if it is, what are you going to say about that, or heaven, or nirvana? What are you going to say? You have two choices. You can either say, well, yes, it reflected our culture, and so it had this massive gap, but the idea is still true. It's the culture that was wrong. Okay. Or you can say that it was made up by the culture, and that's why it has the gap, one way or another. We'll have to have a long... Oh, God, this video is already long. We'll have to have a long talk about it some other time. In the meantime, obviously, I'm going to have a lot to talk about with this book, So there is our Friday, or no, this is our Friday mail haul. We'll do a Friday reads. I won't talk about this, I promise. So we have Bart Ehrman's new book, Heaven and Hell. The Last Kings of Shanghai. Get a bit of a glare there. What else have we got here? High Treason by Sean McFate. Then How Innovation Works by Matt Ridley, who is in the House of Lords. The New Rules of War in paperback. And Avoid the Day, non-fiction. But most of these come out in the summer, so I don't have to worry about them. Good Lord, this mail haul was long. I went off on a tangent about religion, as I will tend to do. But I'll wrap this up. We'll wrap this up, and I will see you soon. Thank you, Book 2.